Thanks for checking out One Debate, a bi-weekly podcast where we strive to help you become the best person at your table. If you like what you hear, please like, review, and subscribe to our podcast so we can help others like you. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen to podcasts. New episodes come out every other Monday. I'm Jacob, and as always, we're here with our resident DM, Gabe.
Hello, Jacob. What are we talking about tonight?
You know, Gabe, today, as I was waiting for us to do this episode, I was kind of trying to make a character, and I'm so good at doing everything except for names. So I figured that we could just talk about character creation and start at the beginning.
The name.
The name. That is correct.
That's a good place to start.
How do you go about it? Because every time that I come to a character, I immediately blank.
I have a couple different ways I go about coming up with names. And it varies depending on if I'm the player or if I'm the DM.
Why?
Because, as a DM, you're coming up with a lot of names. And a lot of these names are going to cycle through your games and they aren't going to remain relevant forever. Or, it's the name that you hate the most and your players will make sure that it stays relevant as they will gather this NPC and treat him like he's glass, even though you want to get rid of him desperately. Maybe his name sounded a little bit too much like penis, or, well, if you've been in a D&D game before, you know how players can be. But one of my first favorite ways is a simple way. You can flip to the back of Xanathar's Guide to Everything, one of Wizards of the Coast books, and the whole last section of that book is all names from the real world, our world. Just lists of names from different cultures.
Oh, that's pretty neat.
Yeah.
I mean, I have Xanathar's, but I guess I kind of forgot that they have this in there, especially just because of me kind of shooting to these other systems. But do they have it just in order of like cleric, bard, ranger, or is it just like one glossary of names?
If I recall correctly, it's by country of origin, and that's ours. But I believe they are all numbered. So it's an amazing tool to just roll dice on if you're a DM. If you're not a DM, I would probably recommend just scaling through it. Of course, you might want something more structured, in which case I'd probably recommend you just go to the player's handbook, go to your race, and then they give a paragraph blurb of, oh, here are some common names for this race. It's not flashy, it's not sexy, but it really does work sometimes just to have a very poignant, relevant, relatable name.
Well, what if players want to, I don't know, be a little bit more creative? Like, for me specifically, when I used to go onto role-playing websites on forums, I would have to go and, like, literally just search up baby names because I'm terrible at creating names, and I need to find like a flow for a name that fits really well. I would always go and like try to find the name that meant the embodiment of the character that I was doing. Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, this is something I picked up watching videos on YouTube from Matt Colville. He suggests doing pretty much just that, but searching for old names like 15th century French medieval names. I could have bungled that, but that's kind of the point. Just take the modern baby names and go back a few hundred years, and you're going to find a whole bunch of names you've never heard before, or names that are, your grandmother's name that's somehow come back into relevance.
So what, you're not going to have like a Hudson? You're not going to have Hudson the half-orc?
Hey, Hudson's a great name. So yeah, I already got an accent for that one.
I hope that the next campaign that you run, a half-orc named Hudson is going to have that voice.
It'll be right next to Ronald.
Happy's Fun Castle?
No. But I have one more before I reverse this back to you. Mashable multi-word names. Okay. And this is something I see all the time in Wizards of the Coast adventure books. And I use this as much as possible as a DM, trying to make characters' names. I take two semi-relevant words to the essence of the character, and I mash them together, and that's the last name. So I had a cleric of Timora, female dwarf, who I named Emily Trickwise. You get this evocative sense of who the character is, easy to remember. Your characters remember it, your players remember it, and you almost know how you need to be role playing with that character as you're cycling through characters just because of the way you say the name. So, oh, Emily Trickwise walks into the room and she has a mischievous glint in her eye because Trickwise.
I also have to ask, was this cleric in the domain of trickery?
She was
That
very good, Jacob.
that makes sense. I was just
Yeah.
a little bit on the nose, but makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's a little too much concern for being too on the nose. It's okay to be on the nose. It's okay to follow tropes. What about you? Do you have any tricks for names?
Absolutely not. No, like I said, I'm so bad at names. It is literally the last thing that I ever do for names.
Yeah.
You said that Xanathars has the glossary of names
Hmm.
in PBTA, powered by the apocalypse. That's how I'm going to refer to it from now on. How
Okay.
PTB or PBTA games go about things. They literally have it in their playbooks. So for Urban Shadows, for instance,
Mhm.
right there underneath the Hunter playbook, it has names, and you get to choose one of those names or create your own. And I'm like, okay, cool. There you go, Humphrey. I have you as the name now. Thank you.
Jake, I have to ask, what's up with the HU names? Humphrey, Hudson.
Well, I was thinking modern for Hudson. I wouldn't say that for Humphrey. And secondly, Humphrey was my oracle,
Okay.
and he was a fantastic player character that I never got to play. So I'm a little bit salty about that.
Well, maybe someday we'll rectify that.
I don't know because I'll probably be the MC in that, and that's okay because I really enjoy running that game. Anyway, let's talk past names. I know that me and you have very different opinions on this.
Yes.
How do you prefer to do your stats? Because I am in the camp of rolling for stats,
Hmm.
and I know that you prefer point buy, and I think that both of us are a little bit not on team standard array.
Yeah.
So we should probably get into what standard array is first, just for
Yes.
people that don't know. Yeah.
Sure. Standard array is basically you look at the attributes of your class, whether you can scale through them, Constitution, Dexterity, yada yada, and standard array just wants you to take the values that they give you that equal a certain number and plug them in. So 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, 8. Point by, of course, equals the same amount of numbers, but lets the player flexibly place those points where they would like to within certain parameters. They don't let you go over 15. They don't let you go under 8, I think.
Yeah, I actually have it written out that you start out with 8 in every one of those categories,
Mhm.
and then you add 27 points to whatever one of those 6 categories. And you're
Yeah.
right, some of the rules say that you can't go over 15 and under 8. That's more of a homebrew thing. Typically, people don't want you to have a that you go over an 18 with the +2 modifier
Mhm.
and less than 8 because that's just typical.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we were talking about the point buy, or not point buy, but rolling for stats. And there's a lot of different ways that you can roll for stats. There's the typical that you could just roll 4d6 and drop the lowest, and then you do that 8 times, or not 8 times, 6 times, and those are the stats that you get. So say that you get a 2, a 2, a 5, and a 6. You drop the first 2, you add up the second 2, the 5, and the 6 together, you get a 13. Boom, you have the 13. How I personally like to do rolling for stats, you roll 4d6, drop the lowest, but you do this 8 times, so that way you can you drop the lowest 2 scores that you have. Then you assign, or not you assign the best 6. You can't have any stat under 8, and you can only have one stat above a 16.
Okay.
So it
That's
makes
nice.
it a little bit more fair, and
Mhm.
it avoids the power creep that you get.
Power creep.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
avoids that.
Power
Because,
creep is my first sort of issue with the rolling for stats.
no, I understand. I mean, there's been times where it's so funny because any campaign that I've run in that the DM allows you to roll for stats, everybody seems to want to do it just because of the novelty of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you get really upset when you have a 9, a 10, a 9, an 8,
Hmm.
you know? So
I
this kind of fixes that.
and I've done it once in one campaign. The game died early, and we had one person, a cleric, who just she had the most incredible stats all across the board, and I just felt useless. I looked at mine, and the DM was allowing us to re-roll if they were too low or too high, and at that point, it really just felt like just let us do point by. Like we re-rolled our stats 6 times because they were too low, and someone had to re-roll once because they were too high. It felt silly, I guess, by
No,
the end of it.
that truthfully is okay. It makes sense because you don't want anyone at your table to feel
Use.
insignificant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I actually have this written out here because I did a practice roll for stats just for the show today.
What'd you get?
I got a 16, a 13, a 10, a 12, a 12, a 14, a 13, and a 13.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, there's been times that I end up with 5 11s. It's just,
Hmm.
I'm not one to focus on my stats as much as my character's personality. It's just not who I am. But in a game where your stats are a little bit more significant than the other systems that you play sometimes, it can be a major factor. It can,
Yeah.
you know?
Especially fifth edition. Fifth edition is so combat heavy, I think, that you really do want to have good stats. Like we discussed last episode, you're going to have different players. Some players are really going to want to feel very useful in combat. If they're left with lackluster rolls, you're potentially already
You're
putting
asking
a
for
damper
trouble.
on. Yeah, exactly.
Like you're gonna have that one person jump in. Here's the thing: before I even get into this point, if you're brand new to playing, I do not recommend rolling for stats. Do not. If you're brand new
Hmm.
to playing, if you want some kind of customization, go with buying your stats. Go with point buy. If you just want to be able to jump in and create a character, do standard array. Standard
Hmm.
array isn't bad. It's just not what either one of us prefer. But don't roll for stats if you're brand new because you're gonna probably be disappointed. That's
Yeah.
just you're rolling the dice there for like literally, and you just don't want to do that.
It feels good to roll for your stats, but I've been on both sides. I've left a session 0 with high stats feeling ecstatic. I've left a session 0 just dreading this campaign because I know I'm going to be subpar to my allies. I much prefer simple point buy. The players get to be very effective. I think that power creep, especially with some of the newer books from Wizards of the Coast, is very real, especially if your DM is running an older adventure with these newer characters. If you're giving them advanced stats, they're going to steamroll some stuff if you're not prepared to homebrew content. So, just food for thought.
No, that's absolutely true. And I do actually have one point for the point buy system. If you want a
Hmm.
completely average character in every way,
Yeah.
that's like it's the best way to make your character the most human. The most
Hmm.
realistic, rather. That would probably be a better way of saying it. Because, yet again, I actually have it written out here as well for my stats. And I got a 14, or I made a 14, a 12, a 13, a 13, a 12, and 11.
Hmm.
There's no easier way to have this most basic stats in the world. So
So, what do we have next, Jacob?
I believe that we're going to probably go into one of our favorite topics of discussion and talk about feats.
Favorite?
I mean, I like feats. I like backgrounds.
Do we agree on this?
I
We
mean,
just we just love feats.
like,
Include feats. Done.
well, no, I thought that you were talking about feet.
Oh, but yeah, I mean that's right next. There's bonds, flaws, ideals, and then fetishes, of course.
Of course.
Right at the top right of your character sheet.
No, so really though, I think that if you embrace a feat when you're thinking of a character already, you have so many opportunities to use that for your character and give them a unique flavor.
Yeah.
You talked about Saltmarsh, right? What is that? The
Mhm.
Ghost of Saltmarsh? They have
Yeah.
so many unique things in there that you can just create such a amazing character.
The backgrounds, particularly in Saltmarsh, are. I know we had said feats first, but the backgrounds in Ghosts of Saltmarsh in Adventure, published by Wizards of the Coast, gives you a series of options that are related to, like, if you wanted to be the acolyte of town, it actually lets you take followers. Your DM has to roll a d4 and say, oh, you arrived in town with 4 individuals that are prepared to do worship with you. And I just have to say that that's phenomenal flavor. It might be daunting at first, especially for newer DMs, to think, what is this player going to do with all these extra characters? But give that player a few commoners. Let them use them as fodder in the first dungeon. Make them take arrows to the knee for your adventure. There's just so much opportunity to create with stuff like that. And feats is the same, especially with martial characters, where I have the argument from some newer players that they feel like the fighter doesn't have enough flavor. It's like, well, you're going to get a lot of opportunities for feats as a fighter, and those feats can wildly flavor your character.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially if it's a racial feat. If you want to give your Dragonborn Dragon Fear, or if it's the Poisoner feat from Tasha's, and suddenly your fighter is now putting poison on his blades, what does that say about him?
That he doesn't
He
afraid.
fights.
That he's not afraid of germs. That he's not
He
a
fights
germaphobe.
dirty.
No, here's the one point that I would like to add for the backgrounds. And I also need to say that when I think of feats and backgrounds, I know that they're two completely different things, but I always categorize them in the same level.
In the same box. That's fair.
If you're going to have an acolyte, if you're going to have that background of where you can have acolytes coming into your town, have your player create the initial people. Don't put that. Don't put that strain on the DM. Like, that's not your job. That's the players. If you're going to have that kind of background, please do your due diligence and create.
Sure.
Like, it's an opportunity for you as a player to add a little bit of your own to the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
You could have these backgrounds. You could think about why these people are following you. You like, if as a DM, that would be the first question that I ask. What did you do to have these people follow you?
Yeah. I mean, we're talking about character creation, so why not create 5 characters for your first crit? But yeah, it's something you want to bring up during the session 0 too with your DM. You're going to want to coordinate with the DM. That's definitely not. Don't just show up to your first game and say, I heard about this thing where I get to have 4 followers on this podcast, so I've got 5 characters. I'm ready to play. So Jake, we like feats. Have you ever played in a game where feats were banned, and not backgrounds? Because I mean, I guess backgrounds are kind of optional. Wizards of the Coast currently allows you to just make custom ones and sort of fill in, which good and bad, ups and downs. But feats. What about a game without feats?
I think that it's truthfully up to the DM, really, how I feel about it. It's in the game. Every resource that you have, if it's in the player's handbook, if it's in the base player's handbook, allow it. That's how I feel.
Okay.
The human
variant.
Yep, the human variant. Everyone seems to not like the human variant feat. I can understand why. But nah, if we're trying to talk about letting the players create the character that they want, if it breaks the game a little bit, meh.
All right. So when I show up with my 4 buddies, not my created acolyte friends, but the other players, and we've all taken the lucky feat, and we're all human variant, how does that make you feel?
A little bit like you're taking advantage of me.
Yeah, same here.
So there has to be some kind of rule in place there. I wouldn't say outright ban it, but maybe only allow one person to have it. If you're min-maxing your players, you're probably not all going to have the human class anyway, so you might, but I never pick human.
Yeah. I very rarely do. I should say that there's some other options for newer DMs. If you do want to give the flavor of feats, you could consider giving humans only the human variant. And so if you're human, you get a feat, but also if you're another race, Xanathar's also has racial feats. maybe you just want to give some of those out at your discretion.
Here's the thing.
Even the playing field.
We aren't saying that you have to follow every single rule. Like, if you absolutely want to have, if you want to create your own feat, go for it. Like, just talk to your DM about it first. I don't know. There's so many things about this that, truthfully, it's just one of those things. I don't have a point here.
I was just about the second slew of angry DM emails we get. My player showed up with 3 NPCs and a custom feat that doesn't exist. And this is all Jacob's fault.
I'm a person for the players, okay?
Yeah.
That's why we work. Gabe, let me ask you a question. What is your opinion on evil characters? Do you allow them in your campaigns?
I am currently playing an evil character.
But that's not your campaign.
True. I do allow them in my campaign, but not without a great degree of buy-in from the character or the player. So a stiff conversation before the game starts, a discussion of our goals as evil characters in the game, because to be honest, they're tricky. They cause a lot of drama, a lot of tension. And if your players aren't in the right headspace, this can cause a lot of issue for your game. While I'm playing this evil character in another game, not my own, I have to constantly message other players after the game and reach out and just say, you foiled my evil plot here, because this just happened to me. I had a paladin stop me from murdering an NPC. I know it makes me sound like a murder hobo, but I messaged him after he did it, and I said that was fantastic. Our characters had a great moment of tension, role play was had, and I've never experienced anything quite like it. So I am all for evil characters done carefully.
That is the best way to say it, because I also think that evil characters can be fantastic in campaigns, but the problem is a lot of people don't play evil characters correctly. They assume that it's the same thing with chaotic neutral characters, right? Like, everyone just assumes, I'm chaotic neutral, I can go do whatever I want. Like, no, that's not the thing. Same thing with evil characters. As soon as you think evil character, brand new player immediately goes, I'm gonna go murder these peasants. Why? Why are you doing that? Just because you're evil doesn't make you a villain. That is the key takeaway. You are the protagonist in this story.
I really like that you said that, because just like you said, you're an evil character. You are not a villain. I like to simplify this for myself to get into the headspace of the character. It's almost like a Venn diagram. Okay. I have on the far left, let's say that's your good. I classify this simply as selfless. And then in the middle, I have self-serving. And then on the far right, where the evil is, I have selfish. So you should have goals for your character. And if you are a good character, you will be selfless more often than not. If you're neutral, you'll be self-serving, self-preservation, etc. And if you're evil, you're going to do selfish things. But that shouldn't be at the jeopardy of the game.
That is such a beautiful... For every person who's listening, Gabe and I have a Google document, and we have our notes written out, and it's kind of a jumble.
Trade secrets.
He wrote Venn diagram, and I was kind of like, what? And with hearing that, I was like, oh, wow, actually, that makes so much more sense than the grid that you get. Because... everybody understands what I mean by grid, with the true neutral in the center and chaotic evil in the bottom right. And
I hate that grid. Just looking at the grid, it's just a jumble of words to me mentally. I know you have a great example, so I don't want to spoil that, but pop culture icons is almost a better way for me to identify these natures or these alignments. And you'll see this online in memes when there's like someone's favorite TV show, and it's the cast of Breaking Bad, and then they put all the characters' faces in the grid. That's the way I like to visualize that personally.
Breaking Bad's actually a good one to even talk about too, because where do you put Walter? Like, have you actually seen that specific one?
I have. I don't want to speak too much on it because I can't remember it perfectly, and listeners might not be aware of it, but this is a great point to also sort of, I don't want to segue too far from alignment, but talk about alignment being fluid, because Walter White isn't the same character,
As
arguably.
Heisenberg.
Yeah, at the beginning of the show, he does have selfishness, selfish tendencies, but they're for a good reason. And at the end of the show, he no longer has those selfish reasons, yet he is still selfish. So yeah, alignment is and should be fluid.
We're gonna go back to this point because we have a lot to say about that as well. Back to alignment. Evil characters. It's so amazing that you even said about the selfless, because that is a great way to look at your good characters. But even when you're playing a lawful good character, it doesn't mean that you have to be stoic. Perfect example of a lawful good character. You can have a bard who's lawful good, who sees things. He sees law and order the same way as he sees the notes on a piece of sheet music.
Okay.
It's structure, just a way of your lawful good bard looking at things. He sees law and order as just the same as a scale.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just something beautiful in those types of way. When you're playing a good character, you have to think of how far is your character willing to go to protect whoever he's going against or whatever goal he's going for, because that's the thing that you need to think of when you're playing a good character, and having those dynamic areas to make yourself grow, you know.
Exactly. Your character can be in the box or in the Venn diagram, but you really do want to consider at what point does your character cross.
Absolutely, it's okay to cross into another box. If for whatever reason your party is arrested and you have your lawful good paladin or your lawful good cleric outside of those situations, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna just be like, well, sorry, game's over?
You're going to go into the jail and you're going to rattle your sword on the bars of the cells and say, good riddance. I knew it was coming. You're all way too uppity. I'll see you after you've stewed for a 3-month period. And then you have a downtime session.
For 3 months, you just sit there and you talk about how you're going to kill your paladin. No, what you're probably...
When I get out of here.
What you're probably going to do as the paladin, this is a great opportunity for you to be all high and mighty, and once you get your allies released somehow, you're going to be like, well, how about we listen to me this time?
What did we learn?
Or you break your vow, you break whatever action, and you bust your party out. Like, you're not going to just let them sit there. That's the point. And if you're following a lawful good character exactly to a T, that might not happen. You're always trying to advance the story. That's bottom line. You're always trying to advance the story, and you have to think about these things. What was I...
keeping off your DM's toes, etc. Yeah.
Absolutely. I have a note here that says, don't shy away from an opportunity for game development. That's the perfect example here.
It's a great point, and not to interrupt you, but
no, you're good.
With my evil character, obviously, we had a moment where it was a near murder of someone who had wronged my character, and you really do have to consider what line, you mentioned this earlier, are you willing to cross? And that's not just as a character, but as a player. Are you willing to murder someone in the streets of a well-populated city that will enforce the law and potentially derail the campaign? How much do you trust your DM to roll with this? How much do you trust your players, your friends to accommodate you and all the chaos that could ensue from these actions?
It's really tricky to play an evil character too, just because not only do you need this buy-in from your DM to allow you to play an evil character that you don't need with a good or neutral character, but you also need that buy-in from your players at the table too. Without even metagaming, like, you just need to have that buy-in from your players. Like, with a good or neutral character, you're never gonna have to worry about an intense interrogation that might turn into more than interrogation, if you catch my drift.
Torture.
Exactly. exactly. And like, there might be some players at your table that aren't comfortable with that, and it's just one of those things. If you're brand new to the game, I would not recommend playing an evil character. It's just Not saying that you shouldn't.
Stressful.
Exactly. There's just added stressors to it that
Hmm.
you, if you're not well versed in the game, you probably shouldn't do it. My other point that I was going to make is that for your evil character, regardless if your class warrants you to have a high charisma score, you might still want to put a high charisma score in there because it's just it just if you're trying to intimidate, like you're
Yep.
probably trying to do, or if you're trying to be deceitful, like you're
Hmm.
probably trying to do, you need those. You need those stats. That's
Yeah.
it's just how it is in the game, you know? The same thing with evil characters like wanting to do their own thing. That's not how you're probably going to run the game. If you're a real evil character, you're going to need buy-in from your other allies. You're going to need allies. That's just the thing.
Yeah.
You're going to need allies, so you're not going to just run around and just do whatever the hell you want to do. It's
Yeah.
just so you're going to have to make treaties with your party, or like you're going to have to help out your paladin once in a while even if you don't want to. So
Hmm.
you have to think of those things.
Yep. There has to be a reason to unify the party. And if your evilness is going to get into the way, that you might need to consider re-rolling the character or crossing over and being a little less evil just for the sake of the game.
Also,
Yes.
as an evil character, being the face of the party is a
It's the
great
best.
no, it's a great idea because just because if your paladin say that I keep going back to a paladin, but if your paladin has something that needs to get done that might not be aligned with what his alignment is, you know who's not going to have an issue with doing it?
The rogue.
Exactly. Your
Yeah.
evil character. Your evil character.
yeah.
You know. So there's just
Yeah.
a lot of ways that you can play an evil character and still be evil, but help everybody else out.
I have to say that having a dynamic party full of individuals with vastly different goals and varying degrees of willingness to achieve those goals is fantastic. There's never a dull moment. I have been in games where you can feel very stagnant if you're all sort of the same alignment, you have the same set of goals. You're just gonna you sort of become zombies. You're just marching toward those goals together, unified. If I mean, this is a tabletop role playing game. What's the point of role playing this passive element when you could be role playing issues and how to overcome them? But that does take maturity.
And that goes back into the last episode. If you guys haven't actually listened to the last episode, you should probably do that because we go into talking about maturity. We go into communication. We go into all these things. So we're just kind of assuming that you had a really good session 0 when we're going into the character creation, you know? So on the flip side, when you're playing, or not on the flip side, when you're playing an evil character, and I said about adding your charisma modifier or adding points into the charisma to get a good charisma score. I argue that for your chaotic characters, depending on how your wisdom is, determines what kind of chaotic character you are.
Oh, okay. That's a good point because we are talking character creation, and we didn't talk about this for stats, but now I have varying emotions on the topic of role playing your character based on your stats. But that's a very good guideline to give yourself. I do like that you mentioned that.
Oh, thank you. How I look at it, if your wisdom is really low, you're going to be impulsive. I
Yeah.
really like to roll I like to have my character stats be the same as what I imagine their personality would be. And that's because if their wisdom is low, it's because either A, they can't predict what the consequences of their actions are going to be, or B, they just don't care. They truthfully just
Yeah.
don't care. Whereas if you have a high wisdom, you might be a druid who sees the chaotic nature of the universe and feels that it's a balancing.
Yeah.
That's my take on your chaotic characters.
It's a wonderful take, and it's a beautiful description of how we differ, because you will look at your stats while I simply look at the mechanics of my class. I will look at, am I a wildfire druid? Well, there's a good chance I'm going to be the kind of chaos that's burn it down, see what grows back. If I'm a stars druid, I'm looking to the sky patiently. Yes, the constellations have deliberated. That's I like to look at the mechanics while you are purely into the stats. And I love that distinction. The only problem where I find it is if you want to play an impulsive druid, but your spellcasting modifier is wisdom, you're just forced to build it because 5th edition is very rigid.
That's
But
that's
again,
fair.
you're also the kind of chaos that's willing to self-sabotage yourself for story, and I love you for that, but I could never do that myself. I just couldn't.
I'm an imp. What can I say? I love my chaos. I really do. If I see an opportunity for another character to kind of get into the thick of it, it's one of my favorite things to do. I'll nudge everybody in that direction.
Yeah.
But
So
I don't know.
alignments, Jake. What else do we have to say on alignment?
The neutral character you talked about your what was it? The selfless, selfish, and what was the middle?
Selfless, self-serving.
Self-serving. That's a great point for your neutral character.
Yeah.
If you're neutral, you're looking at every opportunity to advance your own goals.
Exactly. And I like that you said goals, because this isn't just simply greed. You aren't just trying to fatten your coffers. You should be creating a character with a set of goals. And those goals, when you're self-serving, are paramount.
And that's why I try to get into the lawful and the chaotic sides, because when you're talking about a lawful neutral character, you might be a thief, right? You might be a rogue. You could be lawful neutral in the sense that you're going to steal from somebody, right? But the moment that somebody steals from you, you won't hesitate to go to the police about it or go to the guards and like bring them in. Whereas if you're a chaotic neutral character, you're going to try to do whatever you can do to get your stuff back without thinking about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like you don't care about your actions at that point. You just want your stuff back.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And you're self-sustaining. You're going to do it. You're not going to snitch. Or, I mean, what about lawfulness in having your own code rather than like the code of your culture or the people around you? What about devils having their own code? Devils are in 5th edition, they're lawful evil. And we know that they aren't exactly like Crossroads demons for all you supernatural fans out there. But, I mean, they have a code, right?
No, absolutely, they have a code. You talk about crossroad demons. I'm thinking about Crowley, who's the perfect definition of a neutral character.
Yeah.
Crowley, lawful neutral, but neutral. I do also want to point out when we're talking about good characters, there's a thing that most people don't know about in combat that I always thought was a little bit strange when I first started playing. If you're a good character, you don't want to. Violence shouldn't be your first action ever. You should be trying to find different ways to de-escalate situations. But if it does come down to violence, you can always tell your DM, hey, this is a non-lethal hit.
True. Yeah.
So that way, if the HP goes down to 0, it doesn't kill them, because you're not gonna have your band of good players going around murdering everybody and then everybody else congratulating you. That's gonna make you not as good anymore.
Well, plus when you have a bunch of NPCs that you have reduced to 0 hit points and they're unconscious, now your rogue can, unbeknownst to you, take them and ransom them for gold.
Exactly. So
Win-win.
that's the only other point that I'd need to make about your good characters. And I think that we actually hit everything there for your characters in general. Now we can go back to the fluidity of your alignments, because I think that that's really where we're going with everything. In the beginning of your campaign, when you're setting your goals, who as a child hasn't had their goals change or hasn't had their value system change as they've grown?
Yeah.
You're playing a game, but that doesn't mean that your characters aren't realistic. And that's why I like a Venn diagram description because it doesn't feel as rigid as that grid. That grid, it's boxes. It makes me feel trapped.
Yeah.
Whereas with a Venn diagram, you can actually see a little bit the fluidity of everything.
Yeah. And there's kind of this big debate that seems to be raging back and forth occasionally in the D&D community of should we just do away with alignments? And I have to say no, simply because it's just an extra tool for you to discover your character. But like you said, that does not mean that your character needs to start lawful and end lawful. And I think the grid does restrict you in that way. So when I'm looking at my Venn diagram, you'll note I don't even reference the lawful or chaotic nature of your character. It's as fluid as someone's mood. Now, I think in extreme cases like the lawful good paladin, yes, it's very, very apparent what you should be adhering to, tenets or laws, a code, your oath. But when it comes to a neutral character, it's very hard to maintain some sort of semblance of that.
With the lawful character, though, with the lawful paladin, for instance, like you can have the background or your motivation for why you're adventuring be because there's some kind of conspiracy that makes you doubt your religion now. That gives you the ability to waver from lawful every so often. Like it's just how do you want to play it? How do you and who's to say if you're playing a paladin and you don't want to be the paladin anymore, you can multi-class, and that gives you an even better opportunity to go around and do different things.
Yeah, yeah. And remaining lawful, I mean, when I'm creating my character, I will give myself goals and I leave the end point of my character open. You don't want to have a plan for where your character will end up. But if I'm starting this evil character, he could end up evil, he could end up good. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that I am lawful evil and I have a code to follow. But by the very end of the game, that doesn't mean that I was always lawful whole way through the campaign. I think even your emotions while playing a singular session should potentially alter that. Unless it's a very like core tenet of the character, your ability to express yourself shouldn't always simply be lawful. If your character gets emotional or angry or frustrated and lashes out against that nature, that's where you really get into the good drama inter-party wise. When you reveal a character's weakness to adhere to the laws that they've been holding.
The thing that Powered by the Apocalypse does very well with masks, it's a superhero version of their their system, that they actually have a concept in there that based off of your interactions in scenes with different players, it moves you closer to them or moves you farther away. Like it's an actual dynamic in the game that you have to focus on. So, and there's also in every system, there's intimate, there's some kind of move that focuses on some kind of intimate nature that helps you in those regards too, that you get bonuses. It's just, I think that D&D does such a poor job of focusing on these aspects of the game that can really help you with creating better characters, with role-playing better, with doing better things.
Yeah, I have to agree with you because, again, not to simply draw too much on this recent experience, but with my evil character, I am constantly reaching out to the players in my party. What you've just described to me is a concrete method for tracking sort of the way that your character is interacting with these other players. And if you note that scale, let's say if you're sliding farther and farther away from one of your party members, that gives you a very realistic statement to say, hey, you might want to talk to that player just to make sure that your actions aren't rubbing them the wrong way, that this is indeed all that's happening at the table. Again, being mature and communicating. And I love that the other systems give a tool for that, because in 5th edition, it is relying on you as a player or a DM, an arbiter. Someone has to point these things out. And let's face it, that's challenging.
And it breaks the immersion.
Yeah.
You know, like, here's the thing that a lot of people kind of forget too. we're human, and I guess it's realistic to not really notice that you're kind of falling away from people, because
Hmm.
as human beings we're all very egocentric. um
Yeah.
so I guess
Well,
that's the one thing that I guess D&D does it very well, because they don't have a method for you to track it. But
yeah, I was just about to say. I mean, look at how we just discussed creating your characters, and it's like, what's the first thing you do? You get goals. You name yourself. It's like it's all me, 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 me. That's the point of what you're doing. But yeah, you make a good point.
there's also, I told Gabe that I have this book, The Ultimate Quest Keeper, The Ultimate RPG Quest Keeper, and it actually has these different ways of having you think of your character, having motivations. We keep saying motivations, but it's such a broad
Well, it's
topic.
broad. Yeah.
Exactly. It's such a broad topic that, like, a lot of times it's hard for you to think of it. So one motivation in here is the category of looking out for the little guy, and you could possibly be maybe a fighter who is adventuring because you're looking out for the little guy, because you used to be the little guy, and
Hmm.
now you're adventuring to help everybody else out because you don't ever want to feel that way again. Or you could have been the bully growing up and you realized how bad that was. There's another one of following your hero's footsteps, and it's someone saved your life once and now you're compelled not to waste that gift, and that's why you're a paladin. Like, there's just some small thing like that could help you. And that's why I like having this book. It just helps me think of different ways to create a character that I haven't thought of before.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just different ways for you to create your characters, and think of different motivations, different factors that can
Yeah.
just help flavor your character in those sort of ways.
I have a lot to say on that in my character creation method. I don't know if we're done talking about alignment, but Xanathar's in particular, again, it's one of my favorite books for character creation. There is a segment called "This Is Your Life," and it's a series of tables that you can roll on that give you life events, number of siblings, parents, race, where you were born, what lifestyle you had as a child, magical events that occurred in your life. And while I don't fully adhere to the idea of relying on randomness to create your character, I do believe that there is a degree of restricting yourself to allow your creativity to flourish within boundaries. Because when you have boundaries, you have to you begin to realize that deep down you already had an idea of what your character wasn't going to be. And when a system tries to exert that force upon you through roles where you get an option you don't like, you still learn something about the character that you're creating. You realize, oh, I really didn't like the way that felt. You know that you're not into that brand of heroism, or no, you don't like that you grew up in a normal cottage with four siblings and your father was a farmer. Or you get this wild, weird role where it's like you grew up in a cathedral. You're like, but I'm a warlock. Okay, okay. And then it's like it's seeding ideas for your character creation. And I, even if I don't use a single option from the roll tables, I always roll my characters on the table.
I think that that's great.
Hmm.
It's so funny because using those ideas for seeding is just another valuable way of doing things.
Hmm.
The other way that I really like to, like, really help my character have my character be influenced with the world, or have influence with the world, is finding ways to tie them into other characters truthfully.
Hmm.
And Powered by the Apocalypse does this very well as well, because they have debts for Urban Shadows, they
Hmm.
have bonds for Dungeon World, which is the Dungeons and Dragons equivalent, and they have HX in Apocalypse World, where I have three examples for each, for one for each of the games that I have just listed.
Lay them on me because I have no clue what HX could be.
Yeah, it's it's the same thing as a debt or a bond. So
Okay.
the faceless character in Apocalypse World, which, as I'm sure we all have guessed by now, is an apocalypse version of an RPG game, is you go around the table and you ask somebody at the table this question, and it's, which one of you helped me do something terrible? So now you have your character saying that they did something terrible, but you're
That's
making that
fantastic.
other person come up with a reason of what you did.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
Right? Urban Shadows, the hunter. You consider someone a friend even though your friendship keeps bringing you trouble.
Oh, it's just like us.
Exactly. Now you get points. You get points. So some of these debts, in this case, I believe that person owes you a debt.
Okay.
So you like cash these debts in the game, like that you make them help you. It's a
That's
really,
awesome, man.
yeah, it's awesome. And then Dungeon World has a bond, and the clerics that I think is hilarious is I'm actively trying to convert blank to my religion. Like, it's just so much added fun into the game. Like
Yeah.
I just wish that Dungeons and Dragons did something similar to this to give your party this cohesion we were talking about in the last episode, you know? Like,
Absolutely.
how funny would it be to have your cleric just constantly go up to you and be like, "Hey, have you heard about my god? He's pretty cool.
You
Let me
haven't been
let me
thinking about feet, have you? That's against my religion.
let me talk to you about that over dinner sometime."
How about a cup of tea?
But
Yeah, no, it's great because I mean, I think there's also this degree of players, especially newer players, are expecting the game to run like one of the many games that you can find online, and those games require players that have an incredibly detailed set of desires, machinations, goals, etc. All of those sort of buzzwords we've been throwing around. And they have to have fleshed out backstories. And those little hooks that you just mentioned from the other game types, they give especially newer players an immediate buy into the game. Mm-hmm. They give them a concrete thing that they can sink their teeth into and they can attempt to achieve through roleplay.
now, I fear that we might be running a little bit long for this episode. So, what I do want to say is that I would love for Gabe's Sad Corner.
All right. Gabe's Sad Corner. 3 reasons your patron just isn't that into you. 1. He has another favorite. You're edgy, but you're just not that interesting. 2. You aren't actually accomplishing as much as it had hoped you would be. It had a need, but you aren't fulfilling it. Yet he has enough power to go around that he hasn't realized you're still siphoning, much like that old Netflix subscription. 3. There's a fair chance your patron is a being of unintelligible madness. Maybe don't think too hard about why he isn't paying you mind, and just be grateful you can still sling those Eldritch Blasts.
And with that, Gabe's Sad Corner is now over. Tune in next week where we continue discussing character creation. I'm Jacob.
I'm Gabe.
And this is One Debate.